All right, welcome to week 13 um, for Phil 2306, Intro to Ethics. This week we'll be discussing the distinction or how to reconfigure the idea of obligations and rights under responsibility or agential model of ethics. Right? Because we don't want to do away entirely with the idea of people having rights or having obligations, right? Uh, we want to reconfigure these more familiar notions into a way that fits with responsibility. So to manage this, first we need to define responsibility. Now, there are two different definitions, and what we're working for is a way of reconciling the two functionally. Right? So responsibility is either the state or fact of being accountable or to blame for something. This is the version of it that we discussed last week. Or it is the state or fact of having a duty to deal with something or of having control over someone. Right? This is the version that is kind of stands between care ethics and the understanding of duty that comes out of principle-based accounts of ethics, such as consequentialism and deontology. Right? It's something of a midpoint between the two. So we really want a way of reconciling these two understandings together. And the best way of doing that is to think about the notion of obligation, the notions of obligations and rights under a responsibility-minded ethics. Now, something that is true uh, pretty much universally of those principle-based versions of ethics is that when they thought about obligations, right, or duty, or they thought about rights, they put duties first, right? The two things go hand in hand. If you have an obligation to someone, they have a right to hold you accountable. But it traditionally has been configured in a way of thinking duty first, the rights come after. The rights stem from the fact that someone else has a duty or an obligation to you. What I want to argue over the course of this week's lectures is that that's backwards, right? And in fact, it starts the other way around. We all, by dint of being persons, like the most basic obligations that we have towards each other, stem from the fact that we have rights as individuals. Right? Recognizing the inherent humanity in other people means recognizing mutual rights. And in recognizing mutual rights, means recognizing an obligation or a duty to uh, uphold those rights in others. Right? So first, let's start with a definition of obligations. Seems a little backwards, but it's easier to, it'll be come clear as we go along. Obligations are what we owe to others based upon our morally demanding relations and our autonomy as individuals. Right? These are two separate things. Right? Um, the morally demanding relations are going to be sort of specific obligations, and then the ones that come from our autonomy as individuals are going to be general obligations, right? Which might be superseded by specific obligations if the say someone is physically or mentally handicapped in such a way that they cannot meet uh, that they cannot meet their own needs by themselves, right? In which case a caregiver would have to uh, advocate or meet those obligations for the individual, right? Or in short, regardless of their autonomy, because they have a hindered autonomy in some way, right? But let's not assume autonomy as sort of the baseline, but that it is it's a generally there feature. Um, okay. Rights, on the other hand, are going to be what gives us the ability to hold others morally accountable or answerable for their actions. Right? So rights give us two things in particular. Right? This definition can be broken down. Rights give us, one, the power to hold others morally responsible for their actions, but more to the point, the ability, with that right to hold others responsible, comes the ability to relax, restrict, or release people from those obligations. Right? Because we have the right, and it's interned in us via the right, we and it gives us this power to hold them responsible. It also gives us the power to choose not to, right? Based off of mitigating circumstances or whatnot. So what this shows, but however, the individual who has an obligation to you as the one who has a right, as the individual with a right, always has that obligation unless you see fit to relax them from it, relax the how stringently you hold them to that obligation, release them from it completely, or even maybe hold them more tightly to it, based off of like how morally demanding you see it to be. What this reveals is that the person who has a right always possesses a double power, right, over the other persons in an interpersonal setting. The person who has an obligation always is susceptible to the person who with a right in a moral relation. As long as I have the right to hold you responsible based off of the context of the moral relation in question, promising, consenting, or so on and so forth, then you have an obligation to abide by that right, to acknowledge that in me, and you are susceptible to it, whatever that may entail.